My name is Helen Brooks, and the night my story truly began. I was sitting alone in my living room with 3 sweaters on my back and a cold draft slipping through the windows like a reminder that something in my life had gone terribly wrong. The thermostat on the wall glowed a stubborn 58 degrees. I kept staring at it, wondering how a house I'd paid off with 30 years of hard work could feel so unfamiliar, almost hostile. My fingers were stiff as I held a mug of warm water, not tea, because I'd run out a week earlier and didn't want to bother anyone by asking for more. I told myself it wasn't worth the trouble. I told myself a lot of things lately. When my stomach growled, I pushed myself up and opened the refrigerator, hoping I'd forgotten something in the back. But the same sight greeted me: a carton of expired milk, a lone apple wrinkled at the edges, and a few packets of ketchup I'd saved from takeout meals months ago. The emptiness inside that fridge felt louder than the wind hitting the house. What made all of it unbearable wasn't just the cold or the hunger. It was the fact that I received $8,000 every single month in pension, more than enough to live comfortably, even generously. Yet there I was, shivering in the dark like someone the world had forgotten. And for the first time, a thought crept in. What if someone I trusted wanted me to stay quiet and stay small? I didn't hear my daughter's car pull into the driveway that night. The wind outside was too loud, scraping against the siding like it was trying to peel it off. I had turned off most of the lights to keep the electric bill low, so when the front door opened and a rush of cold air swept into the hallway, I startled like someone waking from a dream they didn't want to be in. Amy's voice cut through the dark before I could even stand up. "Mom, why is it freezing in here?" She sounded more confused than angry, but the confusion carried an edge I wasn't used to hearing from her. She set her bag down and didn't wait for me to answer. She walked straight to the thermostat and stared at it as if it had insulted her personally. 58 degrees! Mom, what is going on? I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and tried to smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I was just trying to keep the bill manageable. It's been so expensive lately." She turned to look at me, and the expression on her face stole whatever calm I had been pretending to hold. She had been a nurse for more than a decade, and nurses have a way of seeing straight through people. She looked at me the same way she looked at her patients when she knew they were hiding something important. She didn't argue. She walked to the kitchen instead. I heard the refrigerator door open. Then silence. A long silence, the kind that carries anger in the stillness. When I stepped into the doorway, she was standing there with her hand on the refrigerator handle, staring at the empty shelves like she was witnessing a crime scene. She lifted the carton of milk, sniffed it, and leaned back as the sour smell hit. "Mom, there's nothing here. I was planning to go shopping tomorrow," I said quietly. "Tomorrow?" She turned around and really looked at me. The tiredness in her eyes was suddenly shadowed by something sharper. "When was the last time you ate an actual meal?" I shrugged. "I had some toast earlier." "With what?" "I had butter a few days ago." Her shoulders dropped, and she pressed a hand to her forehead as if trying to steady her thoughts. "Where's your debit card? I'll run out and get you food right now." I hesitated a second too long. She noticed. "Mom, where's your card?" "It's in the drawer," I finally said, pointing to the small table by the wall. She went straight to it, opened the drawer, and pulled out the card. The moment she flipped it over in her hand, she froze. "Why does this say Brooks Household Account? Why isn't it just your name?" My stomach tightened. I reached for the chair and eased myself down before answering. "Lila said it would be easier if everything went into one place. She handles our bills, and she said it would help with tracking expenses. She's good with that kind of thing." Amy stared at me as if she were seeing an entirely new person, a version of me she didn't understand. "And you just gave her access to your pension?" She insisted, I whispered. She said I was mixing things up. She said she didn't mind helping. Amy's jaw tightened. I could see her trying to choose her next words carefully, but the anger broke through anyway. Mom, you get $8,000 a month. There's no universe where you should be sitting in a cold house with a fridge like this. I opened my mouth, but she lifted a hand to stop me. She wasn't done. She took out her phone, swiped quickly, and called my son. The moment he answered, she put him on speaker. David, why is Mom's house 58 degrees? Why is her fridge empty? There was a pause, and then David's voice came through, uneasy. Lila usually handles things. Maybe she hasn't gotten around to shopping yet. Mom knows our schedule. Amy shot me a look filled with disbelief before speaking into the phone again. Your schedule? She hasn't eaten properly in days. Do you even know what's happening here? Another pause, longer this time. Then a sound in the background, and suddenly, Lila's voice cut in. Amy, calm down. We're doing everything we can. Money is tight, and your mother can't be spending randomly. We're covering her bills. That pension doesn't stretch the way you think. Amy let out a short, humorless laugh. What bills? She's freezing. She's starving. Lila's tone sharpened. Look, we're doing our best. She's fine. We'll talk tomorrow. Before Amy could answer, the call ended. She lowered the phone slowly and looked at me again, her eyes softer now, but full of something else. Fear. Mom, something is really wrong. And tomorrow, I'm not letting this continue. The cold in the room suddenly felt different, heavier somehow, as if the house itself had been waiting for someone to finally say those words. Amy didn't wait until morning. She had always been the kind of person who acted fast when something scared her. And that night, she was terrified in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. She helped me pack a small overnight bag, wrapped her coat around my shoulders as if I were the one she needed to shield from the world, and drove me straight to the emergency room where she worked. I didn't argue. The cold had settled deep inside me, and a part of me wondered what else had settled there while I wasn't paying attention. The hospital lights were too bright after the dimness of my house, and everything smelled faintly of antiseptic and winter coats that had just come in from the wind. A young nurse led me to an exam room while Amy spoke with the charge nurse at the desk. The moment she stepped inside behind me, she closed the door gently and tried to smile, but her eyes were already scanning me, my weight, my skin, my hands. She didn't say anything, but the worry in her face spoke loudly enough. A doctor came in not long after. He moved carefully, the way doctors do when they know the news won't be simple. He asked questions about appetite and dizziness, about sleep and warmth, about how often I'd had a real meal in recent weeks. I answered each one honestly, though I felt smaller with every sentence. Tests were ordered. Blood work, a nutritional panel, a quick assessment of cognitive function that made me feel older than I wanted to admit. When he returned with the results, there was no judgment in his voice, only concern. You're severely undernourished, Mrs. Brooks. You're anemic. Your protein levels are low, and you're showing signs of vitamin deficiencies. Have you been skipping meals? I opened my mouth, but Amy spoke first. She hasn't been able to afford food. She told me she's been living on toast and ketchup. The doctor glanced at me gently. Mrs. Brooks, do you have someone managing your finances? That question hit harder than I expected. I nodded instead of speaking, and his expression softened further. I'm going to bring in our social worker. She specializes in elder care. This isn't something you should go through alone. When he left, I sank back against the thin pillow. The room felt too quiet. Amy sat beside me, took my hand, and held it the way she used to after nightmares when she was small. Mom, she whispered, You don't have to protect anyone right now, and not me, and not David. Tell me the truth. How long has this been happening?" I stared at our joined hands and felt the frustration rise like heat from my chest. "I didn't want to be a burden," I said. "Lila said things were tight. She said she'd take care of everything. She always sounded so sure of herself." Amy shook her head slowly. "Taking care of someone doesn't mean starving them." A knock on the door interrupted us. The social worker, Ms. Ortiz, introduced herself with a calm, steady voice that reminded me of someone lowering an anchor into rough water. She sat across from me, not too close, not too far, her hands folded in a patient way that made me feel seen. "I understand you've been struggling at home," she said softly. "Would you like to talk about it?" I told her what I could, how my card never seemed to work anymore, how Lila always said she was helping, how I didn't want to stir up conflict between my children. Ms. Ortiz listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, asking only small, clarifying questions. When I finished, she let a moment pass before speaking. "Mrs. Brooks, what you're describing fits the markers of financial neglect, possibly abuse. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It means you trusted someone who may not have had your best interests in mind." The words hit me harder than any diagnosis. Abuse. Such a big word, and yet it slipped into the room as if it had been waiting to be spoken for a long time. I didn't cry. I just felt something inside me loosen, like a knot pulling apart after being tightened for months. Amy wasn't so composed. She wiped her eyes quickly and stood up, pacing the room. "We need to see your accounts," she said. "All of them. We need to see where the money is going." She turned to me. "Mom, can you log in? Do you remember the password?" I nodded, ashamed of how relieved I felt to let her take the lead. Amy handed me her tablet and helped me steady my hands. When the banking page opened, I saw my pension deposit at the top, clear as day, $8,000, just as it should be. But the balance underneath was far lower than it should have been. Transfers, withdrawals, large payments to vendors I didn't recognize, hotels I'd never stayed in, restaurants I'd never visited. The pattern was unmistakable, even to me. My signature had never touched any of those transactions. Amy clicked on one charge, then another, her face tightening with each new discovery. She stopped when she reached a monthly payment to a life insurance company I'd never heard of. The amount was steep enough to make my stomach clench. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "did you buy a new life insurance policy?" I shook my head. "No. I already have the one your father left. I haven't changed anything." Amy froze. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't breathe. Then she picked up her phone with trembling fingers. "We're not going home tonight," she said, "and we're not calling David until I understand exactly what Lila has been doing." The cold I'd been feeling for months suddenly shifted into something else entirely. Fear, sharp and undeniable, settling into my bones in a way the winter never had. Amy didn't give me time to sink into fear. The next morning, after a night of restless sleep in the hospital's observation unit, she drove me to a quiet office building on the edge of town. The sign on the door read, "Harper and Associates, Elder Law," a phrase that felt sharper now that I understood it applied to me. I sat in the waiting room with my coat still buttoned, as if the cold from my house had followed me all the way here. When the receptionist called us in, a man in his early 50s greeted us with a warm handshake. His name was Ethan Harper, and there was something steady in his eyes that made me feel as if he had already seen 100 stories like mine, stories people had tried to convince themselves weren't really happening. He invited us to sit, then waited for me to speak. Not Amy. I appreciated that. I told him everything, though my voice trembled each time I admitted another detail I had ignored for too long: the missing debit card, Lila's insistence on managing my pension, the empty refrigerator, the life insurance payments I'd never authorized. His expression never shifted into shock or judgment. Instead, he jotted notes, nodding occasionally in a way that made me feel heard rather than pitied. When I finished, he leaned back slowly. "Mrs. Brooks, what you're describing is a textbook pattern of financial exploitation. It's more common than you might think. The first step is getting you out of their access. We can open a new account in your name only, redirect your pension, and file a petition to freeze joint accounts temporarily." My stomach tightened. "Freeze? Won't that cause trouble?" "It will," he said gently, "but the right kind of trouble, the kind that protects you." Amy exhaled, relieved someone finally said what she'd been saying for hours. Harper continued outlining what needed to be done next: establishing a revocable trust for my house and savings, giving Amy temporary control to prevent further withdrawals, and filing a report with Adult Protective Services. Every step made me feel both safer and more like I was stepping into a storm I had tried to pretend didn't exist. Before we left, Amy asked if we should confront David and Lila yet. Harper shook his head. "Not until we know exactly what we're dealing with. I want someone experienced to trace the finances first. Mrs. Brooks, would you be comfortable meeting with a forensic accountant?" I nodded, though anxiety pulled at my chest. The idea of someone digging through my financial life felt invasive, but the thought of what Lila might have done in the dark was worse. That afternoon, we met Dana Miller, a woman in her 30s with a quiet confidence that reminded me of someone who had spent years following the trails left by dishonest hands. Her office was filled with binders and 2 wide monitors covered in spreadsheets. I had never felt more out of place. She explained her process in simple terms, which I appreciated. She would review every transaction on the joint account, including wire transfers, credit card payments, insurance drafts, and recurring charges I had never seen before. She would compare signatures on the insurance documents with my historical signatures. If anything pointed to fraud, she'd prepare a full report for Harper and, if necessary, law enforcement. I watched her pull up the bank statements on her screen. The scrolling numbers blurred together, but the patterns were unmistakable even to my untrained eyes. Repeated withdrawals in round amounts. Payments to boutique stores in cities I'd never visited. Deposits into an online investment platform in Lila's name. Vacation charges for a beachfront condo in Florida, complete with a security deposit I certainly hadn't paid. Dana clicked on a large transaction dated almost 6 months earlier. "This payment here, this is for a private life insurance policy with a substantial death benefit. The owner is listed as you. The beneficiary is Lila Brooks." My chest tightened. I rubbed my arms as if I were cold again. "I never signed anything for that." Dana turned one of the screens toward me. "The signature doesn't match your historical samples. This looks forged." Amy's breath caught sharply beside me. She placed a hand on my shoulder, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. By the time Dana finished her preliminary review, the weight of the truth sat heavily in the room. Lila hadn't just mishandled my money. She had planned around my absence, as if my life were a timeline she expected to end on her terms. Harper called that evening with instructions. He told Amy to bring me to her house and keep me there. No discussions with David or Lila, no explanations. "If they call, don't answer. If they show up, don't open the door. I'll handle any communication from now on." Amy didn't argue. She drove me to her home and settled me in the guest room with fresh blankets and a warm lamp. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lila's smile, polished, controlled, rehearsed, and the realization that it had never been meant for me. 2 days later, as if the universe decided we couldn't hide any longer, David and Lila arrived at Amy's house. They didn't knock gently. I heard the pounding from the hallway, followed by Lila's sharp voice demanding to know why the accounts were frozen and why the pension deposit hadn't arrived as usual. Amy opened the door only enough to step outside. I stayed back, but close enough to hear. Lila's face was flushed with anger, her words spilling out faster than she could control. "You can't just take over. Amy, this is our responsibility. We take care of your mother, and we deserve something for that." Amy didn't raise her voice. She simply stepped aside and let Harper, who had been waiting in the living room after reviewing Dana's report, appear behind her. He handed Lila an envelope. "Mrs. Brooks has legal representation now. You'll refrain from contacting her directly. All future communication goes through me." Lila's expression changed from rage to something more dangerous, fear mixed with disbelief. The envelope in her hands felt like the beginning of something neither of us could turn away from anymore. David lingered on the porch, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the truth had finally settled on him. When he looked at me, his eyes were rimmed with red, the same frightened look he'd had when he was a boy who broke something he couldn't fix. "Mom," he whispered. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know how bad it was." His words trembled in the cold air, but they didn't melt the ache inside me. For months I had lived in the dark, shivering while believing everything was under control. Now the lies sat between us like a wall we couldn't climb. I wanted to reach for him, but pain held my hand still. Lila stood a few steps away, clutching the legal envelope against her coat. Her voice cracked with anger. "This is all twisted. I handled the bills. I kept the house afloat. If she misunderstood something, that's not abuse." Harper stepped forward, calm as ever. The documents speak for themselves. The forged signatures, the withdrawals, the insurance policy. "Mrs. Brooks no longer falls under your authority." Lila's breath hitched. She stared at David, waiting for him to defend her. But he didn't move. The silence said everything. She turned without another word and stomped down the walkway, her boots crunching through the frost. David stayed behind, watching her go, as though seeing his life unravel piece by piece. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "I don't know how to fix this." "You start by seeing it," I said softly. "That's more than you did before." He nodded, shame clouding his face, then whispered goodbye and followed after her. I watched him leave with a heaviness that settled deep in my chest, the kind that comes from loving someone who failed you without meaning to. Inside, Amy closed the door gently and wrapped her arms around me. Her warmth filled the space where fear used to sit. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady again. The months that followed were slow and strange. Lila fought the charges until every piece of evidence cornered her. In court, she looked smaller than I remembered, her confidence stripped away. When the judge read her sentence, prison time and restitution, she bowed her head, and I felt no triumph, only a quiet release. David and I speak sometimes now, carefully, gently. Healing has its own pace, and I no longer rush mine. I live close to Amy in a small apartment filled with light. On Thursdays, I help seniors at the community center sort their mail and understand the papers that confuse them. Each time I sit with them, I remember the cold fridge, the quiet hunger, and how easy it is to lose control when trust is placed in the wrong hands. People ask how I found my way back. I tell them the truth. I stopped hoping someone would save me. I finally chose to save myself. That decision reshaped the rest completely.